And we are live again now in 2021. Welcome, everyone. I'm Gabacha Moreno. I'm your host for Desert Live. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm really excited to be here today, kicking off volume 2 of this series of events that kicked off last year. So just to give you a brief intro, Desert Live is a virtual series of storytelling events, panels, and workshops curated to entertain and inform you, the outdoor community, in relation to Joshua Tree National Park and our public lands. We like to empower our audience through genuine connections with the culture, beauty, and issues of the outdoors. We also ensure that all Desert Life presenters embody the goals of the program through sustaining a proven record of supporting diversity and inclusion, environmental efforts, and leave no trace principles. This program was launched last year during the COVID-19 pandemic, and it was commissioned by the Desert Institute and the Joshua Tree National Park Association. Today's guest is Serena Rana. She's an advocate for the outdoors and wildlife. She has logged thousands of miles hiking, backpacking, rafting, canyoneering all over the Southwest, both for fun and also working as a guide. Her consulting company, Trails Inspire, promotes the outdoors via photography, writing, public speaking, and trail design and development. Trails Inspire is committed to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion for outdoor spaces. She's also the author of Best Day Hikes on the Arizona Scenic Trail and with the Wilderness Press. She's based in the Sonoran Desert in Tucson, Arizona, ancestral lands of the Tohono O'odham and Pascua Yaqui. In today's class, Serena will take us through the process that she goes through from community outreach to a finished trail and how it is maintained. We'll also discuss different career and volunteer opportunities available in the field, and we'll have a question and answer opportunity to follow. Before we officially begin, I do want to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge the Indigenous peoples who have stewarded the land we are on for time immemorial. For Joshua Tree National Park, I want to acknowledge the Mojave, Cahuilla, Serrano, and Chemehuevi peoples. And from Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I'm tuning in from, I want to acknowledge the Jicarilla Apache and the Pueblo people. I also want to thank the Desert Institute. This event is possible thanks to their support. And for those of you who are new to the Desert Institute, they are the branch of the Joshua Tree National Park Association that's dedicated to bringing educational, cultural, and artistic programs to the field within Joshua Tree National Park and its surrounding lands. And obviously also virtual programs like this one. I first want to ask everyone to be nice in the chat, but please feel free to comment and share your own stories and points of view there as well. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. So there is an ask a question on your screen. If you can use that button to submit the questions, that will help us make sure that we cover everybody when the time comes. In case we get disconnected, please just wait. And we are, I think the best practice is to refresh your browser window or your app window. We'll be doing everything on our end to get connected again. So also, if you experience an issue that you might think it's just happening to you, you can click on that help button at the top of the chat. And if you continue to experience the issue, it's a good practice to just throw it in the chat and say, I cannot hear, because if other folks are experiencing the same, then we'll go into stopping the presentation and making sure that we can get everyone back online in a way that it's helpful. Last but not least, a replay of the event will be available for everyone who registered. So those of you who may need to leave early, maybe arriving late, it will be available. And without much further ado, I want to invite today's guest on screen. And it seems we're having a little bit of an issue. So Serena, I'm going to log you out and invite you over again, okay? Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful patience. Serena will be with us in a few seconds. Alrighty. Great, we are connecting. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. As per usual, the interwebs will not fail to show us how we cannot 100% rely and depend on them. All right, we'll try it again since we are experiencing some issues here. Okay, that makes sense. It seems like Serena is restarting her browser. So we'll just wait a couple of minutes here. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Sorry about the delay. If you have any questions on how to use Crowdcast and this is your first time, I did paste a useful link at the top of the chat in case you want to learn more about how it works. Also, I put there a note about closed captions. So we've been trying to find a solution that integrates well with Crowdcast. We thought we had found one, and then we ran into some walls with that, but we found out that Crowdcast is working on releasing a native integration for closed captions, which we are really excited about. But for now, you have the Google Chrome available. So if you have a Chrome browser, you can get those captions going. And then last but not least on the chat too, you can see everyone who's involved in making this event happen. You can see all our Instagram handles there, and we'd love to continue the conversation over. And yay, Serena is here. Welcome aboard. I will let you talk and introduce your presentation, and I will see you guys at the end. Serena, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but I am unable to hear you right now. Okay, everyone, thanks again for your patience. We are getting Serena here connected again.
Okay.
Yay, welcome back.
Can people hear me now?
I can hear you fine. Can folks in the chat give us a thumbs up or a yay? We can hear you.
Yay, we don't have to wait anymore. Thanks for your patience, everybody. I appreciate it. Okay, now the second one. Can I share my screen? Let's see. How's it looking? Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay, next time. Stay with me. How about now?
Can still see it.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we've got it. Thanks for your patience, everybody. I am going to start my presentation now. Where do trails come from? And my name is Serena Rana. Use she, her pronouns, and my company is Trails Inspire. That's actually a piece of trail that I helped build on the Arizona Trail, Gabacha. You'll be hiking that piece
Yes.
come this fall. And this is one of the first areas that I ever built trail. I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I moved to Arizona in 1994 from the Chicago suburbs. That's me at the Arizona Trail southern terminus at the Mexico border. I wasn't always a hiker. I got into hiking because an accident in 1997 where I was hit by a car while I was walking across the street, left me with fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain condition. And it totally changed my life, and I was very sick for a long time. I tried to figure out ways to cope with it, and one day I started walking with my dog. And this walking with my dog turned into longer and longer hikes, and that's how I fell in love with hiking. Little by little, I increased the amount and distance that I was hiking because I enjoyed it so much. It kept my mind off of the chronic pain I was experiencing. And then in 2007, I went on a hike. And at the end of the hike, I saw the sign that said the Arizona Trail. And I saw all these amazing places that I'd wanted to visit in Arizona. You know, it crosses the Superstition Mountains and the San Francisco Peaks and rim to rim in the Grand Canyon. So I decided that I was going to hike the trail. And it was still about a year off that I was going to try and start my section hike of the trail. So a friend suggested that maybe I could go volunteer. They were in the process of completing the trail at the time. And so I went out, never having done any trail work before, and started volunteering, and found that building the trail was really, I mean, it was a lot of work, but it was really gratifying and a lot of fun. Meet really neat people, and you get outside. And one of my favorite things is when you build a trail, you get to walk out on the new trail that you've just built. So I was a trail building and maintenance volunteer. I have been since 2007. Currently, I'm a trail steward for 3 miles of the Arizona Trail up by the Gateway community of Oracle. In 2011, I was hired by the Arizona Trail Association to develop their Gateway Community Program, which connects the trails to the towns on the trail. And I promoted the trail for a long time. That's also when I started being the trail crew leader for several reroutes that we were building. The trail itself was completed in 2011. And after I worked for the Arizona Trail Association, I founded my company. It's a consulting company, Trails Inspire. And as Gabacha said, I promote the outdoors through writing, photography, public speaking, and trail design. Throughout this process, I was very lucky to learn from a lot of fantastic people. And one person in particular, his name is Mark Flint of Southwest Trail Solutions, really took me under his wing as far as, especially when it came to the design part of it. So that's a little bit about me. I think it's interesting to note that I don't come from a background of trail designers or anything like that. So this is something that I just kind of came into and learned as I went. And volunteering was really, really valuable to me in this respect. So I thought that I would start out by going through a series of questions where what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through what I would do to develop a trail system, develop and build a trail system. It's a lot to go through. So, obviously this is kind of an overview, and also there's a lot more to each of these steps, but I'm going to try and give you the best overview that I can with the time that we have here, and just go through all of the steps that I go through when I'm researching the trail, designing the trail, building the trail, and maintaining the trail. And then at the end, we'll take questions. So question number 1, we have to first acknowledge that public land is land that was originally Native American land. And I think it's important to research those indigenous ties to the land, the current indigenous ties to the land, before you start doing any kind of design or even discussion into where the trail is going to go and what kind of trail design you're going to be pursuing. So when a piece of land is going to be developed for trails, procedures will vary based on the land manager. So who owns the land, so that'll determine who it is that, what kind of rules you have to follow, whether it's a government entity, if it's a private entity. So the different kinds are a private landowner, federal agencies such as the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, or National Park Service, State Parks Department, city or county agencies. And I mentioned researching indigenous ties to the land is very important as well. Question 2 is, who is going to use this trail and what do they want? So, for example, I'm going to use, I've been doing trail design for the town of Tucson, which is the gateway community to the Grand Canyon. And when I came there, one of the things that I did was to interview people. And it's a tourist town, so I went and interviewed the folks that were interfacing with the community. So that's, hotel concierge, that's the, local chamber of commerce, the local tourism board, but also people that, enjoy trails and give tours, like for example, the Pink Jeep tour guides, like asking them what kind of needs do they see in the community for new trail systems, whether that's trails to have fun on, whether that's trails to get to and from work safely. So the interviews with locals it's usually very illuminating, because those are the people that are working with the tourists and the folks that live there from day to day. I also put together a community engagement questionnaire, and that can be tailored to whatever environment that you're working in. So, for example, in southern Arizona where I live, I wouldn't have so many questions about what you do when it's snowing out. But up by the Grand Canyon, yes, I do, because they do get snow. So you tailor your questions to the kind of environment and also the audience that you're approaching. And these can be really interesting, because not only can you get answers to your questions that you already wanted answers to, when you have a comment area and people can just comment what they are looking for, you might have things that you never even thought of come up, and possibilities for trails and things like that. So trail corridors and different ideas, because this is the information gathering portion of the trail design process. And this also, the community engagement part of it is so important right at the outset. Nobody likes to have somebody come in and tell them that they're going to do this to the area that they live in. They want to have investment. They want to be able to have, a say in what's happening. They want to be, especially if you're working with private landowners that are nearby, you want to engage those folks right up front and make them feel like they're a part of the process. Always keeping them engaged. And I always have, like a newsletter sort of thing that goes out with updates about the trail plan. So after you've decided what kinds of, and this could be anything from, we're not talking about just hiking. We're talking about, all the different kinds of trail users, whether that's hiking, biking, equestrians, trail runners, llama packers, who knows, like whoever those folks that are using the trail, you want to make sure that you're keeping them in mind. So all of these different kinds of trail users. So you've got your trail, who owns the land, who's going to use it and how, and then what kind of trail system is question 3. So some of the time you have to do a certain kind of trail system. For example, rails to trails is real popular, converting old railways to trails. Those are obviously going to be linear from one point to another. That also might work, on a river walk or something like that, where you've got a linear piece of land. One of my favorites is to have loops, because it's fun to see something new the entire time. But what I like even better than loops are stacked loops. So stacked loops would be where you have a series of different loops that allow for different lengths of trail. So you can do a short loop that's 2 miles, but have a connector that will take you another 2 miles for 4 miles. Or, that's just one of the examples. So stacked loops will give you the most options as far as the types of trail system that you're building. And that's looking at like an overall view of the kind of trail system. So stacked loops would be, I think, offers the most options. With loops, though, you have to make sure to have really good signage, even more so than out and backs, because you want to make sure that people can find their way. So when I'm doing the actual trail design part of it, so I've gathered my information, and now I'm looking at where do I want to investigate on the ground. So again, I like to use the community and the community information for that, because coming into an area, I generally am not going to be the person that knows the most about that area. So for example, in Tucson, I had one of the locals that was very into the outdoors take me on a site tour, and just, places that were locally enjoyed, places that, maybe to stay away from because of one reason or another. And what we call, and these are called control points. So these control points can either be positive, like I said, a great view or some really cool plants, or, a trail that you can snake between some boulders, things like that. For down here in the Southwest, some really good big giant saguaro cactus, things like that. So those are positive control points. And then the negative control points would be impassable cliffs, terrain that's too steep. If you encroach on archaeological sites, I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Private land in holdings, areas that might not have the best reputation for, locally, and things like that, where if somewhere is like a known area that people go in the forest and party, you kind of want to know that if your trail is going to go through there. So the site tour can be really, really important in gathering information, and not just like gathering information like points on a map, but I suggest actually going out with somebody for at least a day, touring the area. And another way that that I found control points was when I did a public meeting. I had a big laminated map of the area, and I had different colors representing different features. So like a really pretty view, or somewhere that's historic sites, things like that. And so the people could go on this laminated map and show me exactly where things were, and circling and making notes. And so I took that information, all of those, the research and the control points and the public meeting with the map, and then that's where the trail design and development piece comes in. So we're now done with kind of the information gathering portion of it, and now you're taking your information and getting ready to go out on the ground and see what it's like out there. Because you can do a lot of research, but once you get out on the ground doing what's called ground truthing, which is where you actually go out and walk your potential line, things can look a lot different. Excuse me one moment. So before I even go out in the field, I take some time to plot all of these control points on a map. I use a program called Topo Fusion, and Google Earth is really helpful. Also, Google Maps sometimes has information that is missed by one of the other two. Depends. I just use a lot of mapping beforehand to get an idea of where I'm potentially going to try and put this trail. So the program that I use even shows the grade of the proposed path. And one of the really important things is you want to keep things under a 10% grade, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you can actually tell what the grade of the proposed path is on this computer program. So I do the preliminary mapping, and then I put those preliminary mapping. So this is like a example of using GPS and Google Earth, and actually a pretty good representation of stacked loops as well. This is a property in Tucson that I did some trail rehabilitation on. And so this is an example of one of the things that I might generate with all of the mapping and the planning. But you can see this stacked loops. You got their big loop, and then you can make smaller loops here with the different pathways. So then it comes to the really fun part. So you've done all of your research, your preliminary mapping, and now you're going out with a GPS into the desert or the forest or whatever your landscape is. And using the preliminary mapping, I keep a track recording, and I try to connect what I think would work. Now, sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't work. And sometimes my GPS track looks like a bunch of big zigzags because I have to go all over the place trying to find a good connection. Because like I said, you can only see so much on these preliminary, mapping and Google Earth and things like that. The imagery is good, but there's nothing compared to actually getting on the ground and checking it out. And so you go through and you basically, what's the ground truthing is seeing if what you planned lines up with what's in the field. And you just adjust accordingly until you have a line that works. And sometimes you can find some really challenging areas that, for example, you're going to try and avoid a cliff, but you can't do too steep of a grade. So how are you going to get there? And, just little puzzles like this. And this is what I find so interesting. Is the design part of it is part, math and, keeping under a 10% grade, but so much of it is just interest and aesthetics and reading land. Mark Flint, my mentor, he talks a lot about just reading the land. And so also, you might have these really great control points planned for beautiful views and stuff, but then you get out there and you're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea this area was so pretty. And so that becomes part of your trail design. So it's a lot of, trial and error, but it's really gratifying when you actually make that connection. And so after I do the trail design portion of it, and then I just wanted to talk about some trail design principles. Of course, this could be its own class in itself, but these are from the Forest Service Trail Construction and Maintenance Handbook. And so as mentioned, sustainable grades, less than 10%, outslope tread. And a lot of these trail design principles for sustainable trails have to do with how they shed water. And I'll talk more about that. But even in the desert that doesn't, get a lot of rainfall or precipitation, all trail design principles are basically to shed water properly so it doesn't ruin your trail. So outslope tread, grade reversals, erosion resistance, a path that traverses along the side slope, provision for sheet flow of water runoff, positive user experiences, and low maintenance. That low maintenance piece is really important because if you design a trail properly and in a sustainable manner using these trail design principles, we've all been on those trails where you're in a rut that's like, ankle deep or shin deep, even if it's worse. Or, pieces of trail are falling off of the hill and things like that. I mean, obviously there's extenuating circumstances that can do that even to a well-designed trail. But for the most part, it's, these trail design principles, using these trail design principles will avoid these problems in the future. And if you design it correctly, it will require low maintenance, and it won't require rebuilding it all the time. And you know, it might require you to go out and clip some long branches, things like that, doing some brushing. But hopefully, if you do it correctly, then it's going to maintain itself really well. And this is a couple of different kinds of trail tread. So this is a cross section. The first one's a full bench, and this makes a lot more sense when you're in the, you know, in the outdoors. But a bench would be like you're traveling along the side of a slope and the trail is cut into that side of the slope. That's a full bench. A balanced section is where it's not all the way cut in, and the flat section is where obviously it's a less back slope and foreslope to worry about. But even that flat section, you can notice that it's not flat. You have to have some sort of slope, because otherwise your water's just going to pool right in the middle of it and cause that erosion. So after I've done all of the mapping and the GPS tracks from the field, I've gone out there, I've been on the ground, I've made my connections, I've done the ground truthing. Then I come in and I edit those tracks in my Topo Fusion program and just kind of smooth everything out and create a something that's doesn't have all of my weird zigzags from finding the trail and things like that. So I create the final GPS track for it, then plug that into my master map, and I write trail descriptions for each segment of the trail. That includes what the average grade is, what type of soil, what type of vegetation, some of the trail construction techniques, if there's special trail construction techniques such as, steps or, areas that are of concern. I mentioned that as well in the trail description. And then all of these things get put together, the GPS tracks, the trail description, all of the information that's gathered in the first period of the, ask the questionnaire and things like that, public comment period, all of that creates the master plan document that's then used for the next step. And the next step, if you're working on public land, is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA. And on public lands, you have to do surveys to identify archaeological and historic sites, endangered plants, endangered animals, as well as do soil, watershed, and visual resource studies. These are required by the federal government if you're doing public land, any kind of development on public land, trails, transportation, things like that. It also includes a public comment period by the land management agency. And it also includes a tribal consult to take the project for comment to the indigenous people associated with the area. If anything that is found that will negatively impact the resources, the trail is rerouted. So for example, if there was, an archaeological site that might not have been seen on the surface by somebody that was doing the trail design, when you do the survey for the NEPA, then if that's found, then it needs to be moved before it can go through the NEPA process, so that it's not, the whole idea is that it's not damaging the resource. So private lands can opt out of this if they choose, but a lot of people will choose to do that because just for not disturbing anything cultural or botanical. So now we'll go, so we've got the master plan and the NEPA. We've gone through the NEPA. That's a process that takes anywhere from 6 months to a year, depending. And now we got the okay to build the actual trail. So meet the key parts of a trail. I know that we've all been on trails, but a lot of times, you know, people just don't know the terms for them. So here's the terms, and I've got a little diagram as well. So what you're walking on is called the trail tread. So that's the actual piece of trail that's been cleared. And that's generally between 18 to 36 inches wide. And then there's the trail corridor, which is the area that's been cleared of brush on either side of the trail and above if your trail's used by equestrians. Don't forget that, because equestrians don't like it if branches hit them in the head. Generally, single track trail has a trail corridor of 3 feet on either side of the center of the trail tread. One way I like to test this is walking in the middle of the trail with my arms stretched out on both sides and making sure nothing touches the sides. So that's generally like, you know, a little under 6 feet. And that's a good way to test if you've cleared enough of a corridor. So here's a diagram that shows the trail corridor. The whole thing is the trail corridor. The trail tread is the piece that you're actually walking on. The trail clearance, you can see that there's been, on the right, there's like a tree that's been cut. And then the trail clearing width, that you wouldn't cut the tree, you would just cut the branches. You want to make sure that, like I said, clearing uphill and downhill, as well as overhead for equestrians if your trail accepts equestrian use. And so that's kind of a basic trail. Cross section. So building the trail generally is about 5 steps. Of course, again, I could do an entire class just on trail building. So we're gonna just do a little overview of the different steps. So first you clear the corridor, which is, you know, let's say you walk up to a piece of desert and there's a bunch of bushes, but then there's also, let's say there's a bunch of trees. You're going to generally not take the large trees out. You're going to clear around them. That's the digging bushes out, clearing the corridor, and that includes your, not only just your trail tread, but also the on either side for the corridor. And grubbing is taking what you've then chopped off or dug out of the ground and clearing that in a way that when you're doing trail building, you want it to look like the trail has always been there. So you don't want like a bunch of broken branches right next to the trail that you've cut, or a bunch of plants. So you want to try and get those off the trail corridor and out of sight as much as possible. And then after that has been cleared and grubbed, you do your tread work. And that's where you're building the actual tread that folks are walking on. And after that are the drainage features. And there's a bunch of different ways to keep water off of the trail by building drainage features. Some of them can just be made out of dirt. Some of them can be made out of stone, which brings us to the next one, which is rock work, which is a kind of specialized but really interesting part of trail building. A lot of times when you see rock work on the surface, you have no idea how much work went into putting that, you know, like let's just say a couple steps in. It's not just the steps, it's the underlayment that you need to put in to make sure that it doesn't settle or erode. And so that's the 5 steps of getting your trail actually built. And then once you have your trail built, you go back and assess and maintain on a regular basis. And that's going to vary depending on what kind of environment you're in, because, you know, for example, here, I generally try and visit my piece of the trail after monsoon season, where there might be have been some growth from our summer rains. You know, you want to go and check it. If you have a seasonal trail, you want to go check it before it gets open to the public for the season. Make sure that there is not a bunch of downed trees or brush and things like that. So the maintenance is an ongoing part of the process. But like I said, if you design and place your trail correctly, you can do a lot toward making the assessment and maintenance a lot easier. So I wanted to talk about a couple of ways that you can get into trails. There's a lot of volunteer opportunities. That's how I got into trails, working, volunteering with the Arizona Trail Association. So you've got local trail organizations such as the Washington Trails Association. And with these, like, they'll train you on site. They are more than happy to have volunteers who've never done any kind of trail work before and are happy to train you on site. Long trail organizations like the Pacific Crest Trail Association, public land managers such as the Park Service and Forest Service, outdoor volunteers groups such as Volunteers for Outdoor Arizona, and there's also volunteer vacations such as those run by the American Hiking Society. As far as careers, there's a couple of places to look. I would suggest trying to do some volunteer work as a way to get into careers. It's a great way to at least just get a taste of what's happening and the different options that you have. But the careers would include city and county trail departments, trail associations. For lots of folks, the way they get into trail building and maintenance is through AmeriCorps. Corps members have to be between ages 18 to 24, but there's no upper age limit for team leaders. And privately owned trail companies. So privately owned trail companies are starting to pop, they've popped up in recent years. For example, there's a place called Flagline Trails that's here in Arizona that does some really great private work. And so that's an option as well. I wanted to mention that before I start taking questions, that I just published my first book, Best Day Hikes on the Arizona National Scenic Trail, and that you can purchase signed copies at trailsinspire.com/books, and Kindle and print versions are also available through Amazon. And there's my contact information, and I just wanted to give a big thanks to Joshua Tree National Parks Association for hosting this event. I also wanted to mention my family is from India, and Gabacha said that she would be okay with me sharing a link to send aid to the current COVID emergency happening in India. You can visit bit.ly Mutual Aid India, and it's case sensitive.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. I think I've learned a lot, and as a former, or an AmeriCorps Trails Crew alum, I can definitely recommend that everybody, it's there are many opportunities, and if you can, you have the privilege to take a season and go do some service in some of our beautiful lands around the country. I highly recommend that. Okay, so I am checking our Ask a Question box, and I don't see any questions have come through. Anybody want to pop in the chat with any questions or comments? We have time.
Or trail stories.
Or trail stories, yeah. Yeah, I would like to know, maybe let's get a poll going. How many of the folks that are here today have ever done a volunteer or maybe a gig working on a trail? Let's see.
Well, I also wanted to mention something that we talked about in the chat when we had the IG Live, and that is that when you learn how trails are built and maintained and things like that, it's really helps you to find trails when you're on like a sketchy trail that just kind of disappears in the middle of nowhere. It's a lot easier to keep yourself found, and your navigation skills really, it really improves the navigation skills.
Oh, I will have to agree with that. And I've had that happen to me last year while I was training for like a longer backpacking trip. I got to a point where I thought, and I had read on the All Trails app that it said, "Oh, it'll probably disappear at this point." So check your map. And at that point, my GPS on my phone wasn't really working. So whatever they mentioned on the Old Trails comments wasn't really enough to navigate me there. But having an understanding of how you would have connected that loop, I got to figure it out. I had to cross country it for a little bit. And I think that's exactly what you had to do, because at that point the trail wasn't marked. But yeah, eventually I got to the trail, and it was a really powerful moment just for me to be able to say, oh, I can actually guide myself if anything comes down, if it comes down to it, right?
So I have a question here. Is there a typical development to building time period for a simple, straightforward trail, e.g. not a lot of legal issues, etc.? I cannot answer that because every single trail is different. Every single, so many of the different, even like in Arizona, we have all these different national forests. It depends on which national forest you're working with, whether or not they have time for things. Also, funding is a huge issue. So I mean, I really can't say any particular amount of time. It also depends how, is it a priority for the community? Is it a priority for the people who are, engaging that kind of, asking those kinds of questions in their community. So yeah, I wish I had a succinct answer, but I just don't.
It's like maybe in your own property, if you're doing a trail, you can take as little time or as long time that you need.
I get that question a lot from people, like, okay, how quickly can we do this? And it's like, well, and then especially if you're doing something on public land, does the Forest Service have time for you? When do they have time for you? Do they have the personnel? So, there's a lot of things that depend, with the timing.
Absolutely. We have another question from Kristen. They say, when we go hiking on little used trails in Joshua Tree National Park, we notice that it seems like many animals like coyotes and bobcats use the trails. Do you have any sense of whether animals start using human created trails, or whether human created trails often end up following animal routes?
So a little bit of both. So who doesn't like a nice fresh trail to like deposit yours, right? So like the animals are obviously using the path of least resistance when the trail is there. As far as using trails created by animals, a lot of times those aren't sustainable. So that's where like paths versus trails come in, and social trails versus actually designed trails come in, because those animals are just trying to get the quickest way, point A to point B, quickest, easiest way. And sometimes the quickest, easiest way is not a sustainable path. But I will say that for trail design in Arizona, sometimes the cows have it right, and they'll like show you kind of baseline of where to go, or you'll be like looking around and be like, oh, well, that's where the cows went. Maybe I'll check that out. So
That's hilarious. So it's mostly the domestic animals that will pave you the way versus the
well,
wild animals.
also, they've done some research on, I believe, with the jaguars and the ocelots in southern Arizona, using the Arizona Trail specifically, like as a. I'm watching the look on your face. They're very, very rare to see.
Oh,
but
I know.
they,
I grew up in the south of Mexico. I know.
so there has been evidence of them using that as a path for themselves. So
That sounds lovely. Yeah, and I've known. I mean, hiking through Teton National Park, I've just seen all the bear scats all over the trail. I mean, bears just love it. They're like, thank you for making me this giant path so I don't have to rub myself against all the branches. Okay, we have another question, or I think it's a comment from Jan. They say, as an equestrian, I love the backcountry trails, have worked on a lot of trail building events, and my favorite ride was from the Grand Canyon to San Francisco Peaks on the Arizona Trail.
That is one of the founding members of the Arizona Trail Association there, Gabacha.
There
So
you go.
she's talking about, thanks so much for your comment, Jan. I bet you have ridden some amazing miles, and anything that includes the Grand Canyon's on my list too.
Wonderful. And then we also have this comment about in Asia and Africa, it's the elephant paths that people follow, usually because they are large animals and clear a very nice corridor.
Oh. Hey, if it's going to clear the corridor, you might as well use it, right? Especially in the jungle like that. I can't even imagine what trail, I've heard some accounts of, kind of trying to make your trail through the jungle. I'm pretty lucky in that, a lot of times in the desert, you can see where you want to go with your trail. I can't imagine like hacking your way through the deep desert. The deep jungle to make your trail. So.
No, it's definitely, sometimes you cannot see the sky from the jungle. So it's like, where is the sun again? Well, I think that's the end of the comments. I once again want to thank you, Serena, for this fabulous presentation. I think it was super informative. I hope folks enjoyed it. If you have a friend that's interested in learning, they can definitely get access to this after it's done. They can watch the replay. I'm also going to drop in the chat ways that you can continue to support the Joshua Tree National Park Association and the Desert Institute's efforts, as well as ways for you to connect in upcoming events, watch replays of past events. Serena here was actually part of a Why Leave No Trace panel last year during Volume 1 of Desert Live. So you can check that out on the YouTube channel. And we hope to see you again in some of the upcoming Desert Live events. We're going to have them kind of at the end of every month, all the way through August of this year. Our next event is with Sydney Williams from Hiking My Feelings, and she's going to join us to talk about trail thoughts and how a mindful approach to the trail can help us through our own personal development and growth. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm Gabacha, your host of Desert Live, and I'll see you here next month.